This is a Dauntless Media Collective podcast. Visit dauntless.fm for more content.
So they drafted up their marriage and family statement, which basically listed every sort of lifestyle, the quotes, that is not being a cisgender heterosexual person in a heterosexual marriage. They listed out, bisexuality and transgender, everything they could possibly think of that was outside. And they said these lifestyles are repugnant to God and the principles of the university. And if you are going to work here, you have to agree to that. And that's when I'm faced with how much of an ally am I?
Hi, I'm Nate.
I'm Gail.
And this is Full Mutuality. Our guest this evening is Cynthia Vacca Davis, who is an English professor at Christopher Newport University. Did I get the university name correct? Okay, yep. Cool. In Newport News, Virginia. And she's also the author of the book Intersexion, which is kind of going to be the basis for our conversation this evening. But Cynthia, first of all, welcome to the podcast. I'm so glad you decided to come join us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's definitely a pleasure.
I'd love to do some warm-up questions just for fun. Just some icebreaker stuff.
Okay, all right.
Okay? I thought it would be fun to do some icebreaker questions just to start off. I mean, you're a professor, and we're going to probably get a little academic. No, maybe not too academic, but we're going to be talking about a book. But I figured, to start off, people are getting to know you, fun stuff, really not too serious. So here we go. So people can get to know you. Phone call or text message? Which do you prefer? We're going to do some this or that.
Oh, text message.
A few questions.
Text message for sure, every time.
Woman after my own heart.
Yep. Yeah, I actually get phone anxiety.
Book or movie?
Book. Yes. Every time.
Okay.
Yep. I have a little backpack that I was wearing on a trip last week.
The author picks the book over the movies.
Yeah, I mean, really, right? My backpack that I was wearing was on a trip last week. It said the book was better. Always.
Always the book. All right. Android or iPhone?
iPhone. 100% iPhone. iPhone, for sure.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee, right here in my mug.
Nice.
Yep, that's Nate and me.
Yeah.
All right, next one is wine or beer?
Oh, wine. Definitely wine.
I usually default to wine, but when I'm with Nate, probably beer because that's his thing. Test the waters or dive in the deep end?
Oh, no. Mostly diving right in.
Nice.
Mostly.
All right. Right lane or left lane?
Right lane. Yep.
Socks in bed or not?
Oh, no, never. No.
Never? Oh, you're on Team Nate on that one?
Never.
Yeah. No, I cannot.
I'm
Toes
the weirdo.
Must be free.
I'm the weirdo who needs her socks to stay warm at night.
If for some reason I get into bed and I have the socks on, I just immediately just kick them off, and then they're just awkwardly rolling around at the bottom of the bed.
All right. Okay, I don't know if this one ties into the last one or not, but winter or summer?
Oh, summer. I don't like winter. No.
Oh, we're the same.
No winter.
Same. Summer. Totally. All right.
Cool.
Comedy or horror?
Oh, comedy. I love to laugh, and I don't like to be scared.
Me too. We're like answering, except for the socks. We've been very similar on this. Socks and I'm an Android, but apart from that, a lot of this is just lining up. Okay. Watching sports or playing sports?
Oh, watching sports. I make too many mistakes when I'm playing them. I'm not athletic.
I'm with you. I prefer to watch. Totally. Okay, hang on. I have two more. Cat or dog person?
Oh, I have both. So, I hope they're not listening. I think dog. Yeah. Yeah.
Nate is a huge doggy person.
Gonna have to go with dog.
All right.
Yes,
last question.
I love my kitties, but
yeah, I'm the cat person of the two of us. Okay, last question. Big party or a small gathering?
Ooh, small gathering, but it's got to be quality. It's got to have good people, good food, good wine, but not too big.
Love it. Love it. Yeah. Totally. All right. So that's it. You made it. You passed our icebreaker round of getting to know you.
You win.
Yay.
I don't know what you win, but you win.
Yay.
So yeah, and we're all on team. We've gone through some church stuff and we've come out some of it. We've been processing things on our podcast. We talk a lot about the evangelical stuff. But we also like to talk about being on the margins and what that looks like and help expand people's thoughts. But we thought, maybe we'll start in with just what's your background? What were you a part of a faith community growing up? What did that look like? Where do you hail from? And then how have you evolved or how has that changed through the years when it comes to that stuff?
Yeah. I mean, my early evangelical experience, because that's what it was. I was mostly in evangelical churches, and it was like a cornucopia of churches. And I grew up, I was born into a family who was not churched and just a regular secular family. And then when I was 8, my dad came to faith through watching Billy Graham on TV. And my dad is one of these all-in guys. And when he heard the Billy Graham crusade and decided this was what he wanted to do, because he was kind of on a spiritual journey of his own, he decided he was going to try all the churches. He didn't really know what he was doing. So he starts going to church on Sundays. And I decide, why not? I'll go with him. I'll see what this is about. I just kind of wanted to get out of the house, I guess. And we went to Methodist churches and Presbyterian churches and Bible churches and Bible Baptist churches and charismatic churches. I mean, like the whole cornucopia. So in the beginning, so that was really fascinating because I got to see that what happened in one church was really different from what happened in the other church. And then that might be even different, radically from in the next church we went to, but there were patterns that I started to pick up, right? Where they're different, but they're the same. So,
the Bible clearly says changed from church to church, but there was some things that kind of crossed through all of them. Mm-hmm.
That was well said. Exactly. Because the Bible was clear on so many things. So many things. Like at one church, the Bible's clear that you don't dance or you don't play cards and you never drink. But then another church, some of that was okay again, but there was another list of things that you don't do. So the rules changed a lot, even though the Bible was clear. Yeah.
That's sort of part and parcel of the evangelical experience. And I guess, for people who have, like you and like myself, I also kind of heard a little bit of my own story in my upbringing. After spending like nearly 20 years at one church, started doing the church hopping thing for a few years after that. And it's incredible how similar they all are in certain things, but how they suddenly, like each one has a militant stance about something that the other church doesn't necessarily have a militant stance or has the opposite militant stance on.
Yes.
I did find that to be
exactly
fascinating.
Yes.
I say fascinating a little bit tongue in cheek because it turned into something painful, really, in a lot of those environments for a lot of people.
Definitely. It's just kind of like you make these observations as a kid and then as you get older and you start putting it all together and start kind of realizing what's happening, then it does become painful when you have that mature outlook when you're looking back at, that wasn't normal.
So in your journey of faith and having this, this very interesting experience of being able to see all the differences in churches and check them out and then notice similarities in them, where were you at? maybe tell us about the process leading up to meeting Danny. Where were you at? Were you in an evangelical church at that point? How did you guys come across each other? Because we're going to be talking about your book and it intersects your stories. The story's called Intersection, and it's an intersection of your two stories and how that played out and how that affected you. So where were you at when you met Danny, and what did that look like?
So I was at a church where for the first time I was starting to feel super comfortable, where it was okay to have questions. And not everybody believed the same things. And you could come to a Bible study and have people from totally opposite ends of an issue talking back and forth. And at first, I'm kind of holding my breath, wondering, oh my goodness, who's going to get excommunicated? But it never worked out that way. Everybody was just having really good dialogue. There was a lot of diversity. And I'm feeling for the first time, like maybe this is truly Christianity working the way it was always meant to work. So I was all in and I was invested at this church. And Danny was another church member. And at the time when I met Danny, I was better friends with his partner at the time, female partner. And Danny was, as far as I knew, he was presenting as a female. So I thought that they were a lesbian couple. And I thought, oh, this is so cool. Also, because my church apparently has lesbian and gay people, and nobody seems to be upset about that too. So this is probably a pretty good place. And that's kind of how it started, where this is the environment that I met Danny in.
Okay. And then your relationship then was that so you met Danny at this church and they were fellow members. Did you have any kind of were you you weren't a youth leader or anything at that church, right? Where you met Danny?
No, Danny was actually the youth leader at this church.
Oh, okay.
And I think that about the time when we were starting to become friends, because I have a background in youth ministry. I had been a youth leader at a different church. And then as Danny and I started to become friends, Danny and his partner were leading the youth group. So they would sometimes ask for help. They were doing something, bigger with the youth group and needed an extra pair of hands, and they would ask me. So I love to do that because I love youth ministry, and that's, something I had a background in. And that was one of the ways we started to connect as friends.
I see. Okay.
So maybe you could share, I know Danny has given you permission to share their story. Clearly, you've written a book about their story too, and we'll get into that in a bit. But tying into before you decided that you would start picking up their story and talking about his story, how did, because you mentioned that Danny was female presenting, how did that go down in your relationship with them coming to their own recognition, and what did that look like?
Yeah, I had mentioned, and Danny goes by he, him pronouns, and he's fully living as a male now. But in the beginning, he wasn't. So, and as I had mentioned, I was better friends with his partner at the time. And things started, it was very clear to me that there was something going on that was not quite right with Danny. He just seemed very depressed, and his partner was depressed, and a lot of friends were beginning to worry about what might be going on. We didn't know if there were maybe some physical problems because he had had a couple surgeries, but it also seemed that there was something else that just wasn't going well leading up to the conversation that one day I got a text, and it was a mutual friend, and said, can you meet us over here at this Panera, because Danny wants to share something. And so I came to the Panera. My husband was with me, and Danny was there. And that was Danny's kind of very first putting a toe in the waters and testing out, telling his story for the first time, and said basically, so I'm not Danny with an I am Danny with a Y, as in I'm not female, I'm male. And explained to me, because I had not heard the word intersex up until that point. This was 2014. I did not know the word intersex.
Okay.
And until this conversation. And Danny said, yeah, I am intersex. And if you've ever heard the word hermaphrodite, which I had, so that's an archaic word and we don't use it anymore, but that's what I'm trying to communicate. And then I said, oh yeah, I have heard that word before. And he kind of just went through very carefully and cautiously, like he was trying out this script of how he was going to go forward and tell other people. And the reason why he chose my husband and I was kind of almost a shot in the dark, because we knew each other, but not super well at this point. But he knew we were safe people. We had a reputation of being safe people who, we had friends in the LGBTQ community. We were known for being safe people to talk to. So this mutual friend said, why don't you, try out your story? And that's kind of how our friendship, our actual friendship began that night when he told his story.
And now, as you sort of document his story in your book. Now, to kind of clarify a little bit for anyone listening, your book is sort of presented as a narrative nonfiction in kind of a dramatic fashion, written in the first person from both your perspective and Danny's perspective. And I find it fascinating, and I also find it incredibly arresting. What was that like for you to, especially since one thing that I thought was really interesting was to paint the picture of Danny's childhood and his late elementary and early middle school years as well, and tracing his story even going back that far. What was that like for you, writing almost in his voice and telling his story through the eyes of a child, basically?
Yeah. It wasn't something that evolved over time. I didn't start out with the idea that I was going to write it in first person. I didn't even start out with the idea that I was even going to write his story, because that was a scary thought for me. And it can be problematic, right, for an ally to tell someone else's story. And so I was really sensitive about that and kind of almost hesitant to approach the story, but was kind of almost prodded into it one night where it was a couple of weeks into Danny's transition, where he was starting to tell people who he was and how he was going to go forward in his life. And not to give too much away from the book, but it was at a pivotal moment. And a bunch of us were in the living room, and someone said, there is no one would ever believe a story like this. This is just not the kind of story that anyone could possibly believe. It would just not be believable. And then my husband kind of said, oh, my wife could write this story, because he's always, husbands. And I'm like, just, and in truth, I was actually in my MFA program at the time. And I was struggling a little bit because I was trying to be a humorist. That was my goal. I was going to write humorous essays. And I ended up in a workshop with a professor who did not like humor at all. And everything was dark and morose and sad. And he didn't like anything humorous that I wrote. And he's like, you need a darker subject. And so I was actually thinking about options of what am I going to do? And then I smacked my husband. I said, I'm not writing Danny's story. And then Danny said, well, yeah, you should. You totally should write my story. I'm like, really? And he said, it's an important, I feel like it's important for people to know. And I kind of really would like my story told. I'm not interested in writing it myself. I don't like to write. But if you want to ask me questions and kind of write about this, I'd be open to that. So that's kind of how it began. And it was just us getting together a couple nights a week, and he would tell his stories from his life, and I'm taking notes, and I'm thinking, oh, maybe I'll write this in the third person, or maybe I'm going to overlay it with some academic material. I didn't really know. I didn't have a vision for the book as it is now at that time, other than I'm collecting his story and I'm going to carry his story. And it wasn't too long into that process that I started having some events in my life that, that intersection that Gail was talking about earlier, that's when it became our story. And it was really actually second to last draft before I started pitching it, where I wrote Danny in first person because an editor said, you really need to do this in first person. No, I can't. But she said, think of it as ghostwriting. It's like you're ghostwriting his story. And then that kind of clicked with me. And I felt a little better about it because Danny is like, I don't care. First person, third person, just tell the story.
Has he given you some feedback afterwards? Like, now that you've written it out and he's had a chance to read it.
Yeah.
What was that like when he was able to read through it and give you his take? How did you? What was that?
It was
that like?
It was developing over a long period of time because I was so, I'm carrying the story and it's a huge responsibility, and I want it to be right, and I want it to really truly be his story. So I would give him pages or I'd ask him about things. And one reason why it was a long process is there would be seasons where he couldn't really deeply invest in it because he said, you're going to, he said, I mean, this is a compliment, but you're writing this too well. And what he meant was that it made him relive it. And he said, those scenes are too real. And when I read them, I am going right back into those moments. And some days he'd say, yeah, I'm okay with it. It's, I'm fine with it now. And there'd be other seasons where he'd say, I think I need a break from reading it. He'd answer any questions he'd talk all the time. As far as like actually reading the pages, it was kind of a roller coaster of some days were okay and some days weren't okay for him to actually get that deeply into the story again.
That makes total sense. And it's probably not something people realize when you're deciding, hey, I'm not just going to pick up my friend's story, take from the notes that they've written and told me and the notes that I've taken listening to them, but just the idea of running it through them and what that's like to have to relive listening to your own story. That makes sense. Why it would have taken a long time just to make it through that in a way that's comfortable for them and just sensitive and thoughtful about they want their story out there, but he also, needs to go be in a headspace where he's willing to listen to hearing and reliving that. So it's an important story, and getting back to, how this story intersects with your story. I mean, initially you wanted to write a story about what he had gone through because you had been led into his life and had seen some of this unfold as he came to a realization and told you about it. And, you're putting this together thinking, okay, this is going to be about his story. And then events start to unfold where it's all of a sudden becoming, as an ally, it starts to become something a little bit different in terms of your story taking place in the middle of his story. And how did that tell us where you were at? What was going down?
It was, I think it was just a week after the night when we were all together in my living room and he's like, yeah, write my story. And I'm thinking, okay, so this is kind of what I'm doing in my MFA program. It's, it's an academic project. We'll see what happens with it. But at the same time, I had also said, because that was his question, right? When we met at Panera, will you be on my team, basically? Will you, I need some people around me that I can trust as I go through this, because I might lose everything. I might lose my family. I might lose church. I might not be able to work with the youth anymore. I might lose everything. And so that was part of it, saying, yeah, sure. it's a no-brainer for me that I'm going to support you. You came to me with this, and it's so serious. It's truly life and death. And yes, I'm going to be there. So about a week after that, where I was in my life is I was circuiting 3 universities. I was in my little Chevy Spark, and I had the university where I was getting my MFA, and then I had Christopher Newport. I was an adjunct there. And then I was traveling across the state line down into North Carolina to this small little Bible school. And I was an adjunct there as well. And so my week was just a circuit. I'm going through 2 different bridge tunnels, crossing into North Carolina and back into Virginia, just a revolving circuit of these 3 universities. And I'm thinking, adjuncting is hard work. It's like you're the itinerant workers of academia, and you don't have any job security. You are teaching the same classes as other professors, but not getting paid nearly the same amount of money to do it. So I'm thinking maybe something will come of this. Maybe one of these schools is going to offer me something a little more stable. And lo and behold, as unlikely as that was at that point, because I don't even have my MFA. I had a master's, which was why I was teaching, but I didn't have my MFA, which was, kind of what you're supposed to have. It's sort of like having a PhD, and that's what most professors will have. And one day, the little Bible school says, we need to talk because we've just had an audit of some sort, and we need to immediately hire a tenure track professor to oversee the English department. And we need to make this appointment pretty quickly. And at that point, I was the only even remotely qualified person on campus. So they were kind of right from the beginning looking at me to do that.
Wow.
And it was almost like a formality. It's mid-semester. I don't have my MFA, and all of a sudden I'm being offered a tenure track job, which it just never happens. That never, ever happens. So that sounds good, but there's a big catch. Because the formality, it was kind of come on campus, talk to different people. We're going to get to know you a little better. There's paperwork. There's, just meet and greet of the whole faculty. And then they said, well, we also have this new statement that we're making everybody sign. And it was basically, they called it a marriage and family statement. Yeah. And red flags are going up all over the place.
We kind of, if you come from evangelicalism, you're like, I have a feeling I might have an idea what might be in these pages.
Yeah, I think I know what's coming.
Oh, boy.
And they had just recently drafted, because they're in North Carolina, and Virginia had just legalized gay marriage. It wasn't federal yet, but Virginia legalized it. So they're afraid, what's coming down the pike to North Carolina? So we have to get ahead of it, right? So they drafted up their marriage and family statement, which basically listed every sort of lifestyle, the quotes, that is not being a cisgender heterosexual person in a heterosexual marriage. They listed out, bisexuality and transgender, everything they could possibly think of that was outside. And they said these lifestyles are repugnant to God and the principles of the university. And if you are going to work here, you have to agree to that. And that's when I'm faced with how much of an ally am I, right?
Yeah.
That's that is such an important point. I think we have a friend who's come on our podcast before, but in one of her podcasts, her name is Janice. She mentioned how, and she's just talking about the shootings in Buffalo, I think that week, against the Black community that were very targeted. And her comment was, white people asking how can they be allies or what can they do to be a support? And she's kind of tired. I just kind of heard in her voice the resignation of like, we've given you all the book recommendations. And she goes, you know what? I have a better question. And she's like, what are you willing to give up to be an ally? That was what she left people with in terms of her answer to that question. And it stuck with me ever since she said it. That's something that I play over and over in my head, in terms of how can I support you is an easier question. The harder one is what am I willing to give up in order to support you? And in your case, that was, what came with that job for you, or what was the benefit, like health insurance probably, and like what job security and what,
it was going to change my life. I had a child that was going to the school, so I wouldn't have had to pay tuition right there, right? And then, immediately my income was going to just be way more than what I was making as an adjunct. And I was when you have tenure, you have that job. That's your job until you die, unless you do something really, really stupid.
Yeah.
So it was going to be a big life upgrade. But you're right, though. That's such an
until you read the statement.
Until I read the statement, and then that's when things derailed. But being an ally costs something, which was not something I realized up to that point, because it's easy to say, oh yeah, I have gay friends and I love them, but I never really had to pay a cost associated with that.
Yeah. I found that chapter where you describe, and I won't spoil anything because it's quite a chapter, describing the interaction that you had in that boardroom with, I guess it was the school president and a few other people, professors and whatnot. And it was so reminiscent of, I attended a fundamentalist university. I don't know if you're familiar with Bob Jones University in Greenville, South Carolina. Yep. So that's my alma mater. And the characters in that boardroom reminded me so much of people that I've had to interact with when I was at school. And it's funny, going from that environment to where I am now. I work for a public university here in New Jersey, and it's night and day from the conservative Christian university environment or higher education, and then finding myself in a state school, a state university. It's such a stark difference. And I found that particular chapter. So for anyone who's listening, I almost would, just from my own perspective, anybody who has kind of been through the evangelical higher education world, just the description of that alone is worth kind of the price of admission, because it was something else. It brought up all sorts of thoughts and feelings in me, and I was conjuring up. I mean, I was envisioning the admin building on Wade Hampton Boulevard I know it's not, but in my mind, this is what I was imagining. Bob Jones University's administration building. So.
Yeah, you're superimposing your experience, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
And it's so interesting that you recognize those characters, even though you don't know the people. You know those characters, which goes back to what we were saying earlier, how there's patterns.
Oh, absolutely.
In the evangelical communities, whether they're school communities or church communities, even though the issues may change, the patterns are the same. Yeah.
I want to go back to something that you mentioned when you were having your conversation with Danny, and as he was sort of wrestling with sharing his story and finally kind of, I guess, narratively coming out.
Right.
You made the comment that he said he had this fear that he might not be able to work with the youth anymore at the church.
This is what I was curious about. How did the church handle this?
Yeah, because you had mentioned prior to that it appeared that the church was LGBTQ friendly, given the fact that you were seeing at the time Danny being female presenting with a female partner. In your mind, I'm assuming you're thinking, oh, awesome! Like this is a queer friendly church. And then Danny expressing this fear. What happened? Where did that come from? Was the church sending mixed messages? What was going on there?
There were mixed messages, and I think there was a lot of don't ask, don't tell going on in the relationship with Danny and his partner at that time. And my sensibilities were, oh, this has to be, because I've been to their house and they share a car and they share vacations, and I just all the signs were there, but they weren't super publicly saying, oh, this is our situation. There was a lot of implied, and I think there were some other people and this was a church that people came in and out of a lot too. And so sometimes there would be other people that would come in and would maybe even admit to being gay. And nobody really got too alarmed or excited about it. So I'm just assuming from these context clues that I don't think this is an issue that is a big deal here. And I knew the pastor pretty well, and we had talked about it, and I knew the pastor personally was fine. The LGBTQ people, because we didn't know then. We didn't know about intersex. They're welcome here. They're welcome here, and they didn't have any weird. One thing I did love about this church is there wasn't that weird statement of faith that you often get about what the good things are and what the bad things are. You didn't have that, so I'm like, okay. I mean, I think we're safe here. Was my thought at the time.
But then did that change at some point?
It changed weirdly and slowly, because in the beginning, Danny was able to tell the church community about what was happening. He was able to almost instruct them about what intersex meant. And he did it first, privately with people that he was closer to. And then he did it in a little meeting with church leadership. And then he told the entire congregation, and everyone seemed pretty supportive. When you told the whole congregation, there were hugs and people asking sincere questions, and it seemed to be a positive experience. Mm-hmm. And that's what Danny needed at that moment. And I think that if there had been any pushback then, it would have been pretty devastating to him. But in the beginning, it was pretty welcoming. But in my mind, what seemed to shift things was when Danny was not in a very healthy relationship with his partner, and actually part of his decision to live life as himself was that he didn't want to be in this relationship anymore because there were some very unhealthy elements to it. Mm. So when he was deciding that was what was, needing to happen, and then later on when he decided that he was going to date, that's when people were really judgmental. It was almost like, you can be intersex, but you better not, get into leave the relationship that you're in. And then second of all, you better not start dating other people, because we're not comfortable with that.
The Chapel Probation podcast takes a critical look at evangelical colleges and universities, focusing initially on Azusa Pacific University, where I taught English for 15 years. I'm Scott Okamoto, and I'm writing a book about how I deconstructed from faith completely while at APU. This podcast, though, is my tribute to the students and other faculty who survived evangelical higher education. They faced ridiculous racism, sexism, anti-LGBTQ hatred, and all manner of bigotry. From the heartless evils of the prosperity gospel to the destructive pseudo-theology of purity culture, the stories will break your heart, but they will also inspire. These people faced bigotry and fought back. In a weird, kind of sick way, we went through some shit, but we formed identities and we formed communities through it all. I hope you will join us.
Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying this episode. I want to take a quick break from the conversation to let you know that we have a fantastic new way for you to support the podcast. If you like what you hear from our show and want to partner with us, head over to patreon.com/fullmutuality to donate. As a partner, you'll get exclusive content, access to occasional live recording events, and more for as little as $5 a month. Thank you already for your support of what we're creating, and now, back to the conversation.
That must have been a shocker. I think there's often a trepidation a lot of people have about progressive churches, because it seems like sometimes, especially, and maybe not for, I don't know, maybe it's different with mainline. I'm part of a mainline coming out of evangelicalism, but I didn't grow up in it, so I have less knowledge. But I think for churches where they came out of evangelicalism and are trying to create something healthy and want to make a new like, inviting church that resembles some of their evangelical background, but maybe takes out what they think is the harmful elements of it. Some of those progressive churches end up being scary places for people because the lines are not very well established of what is okay and what's not okay. And assumptions get made like that. Like, oh, okay, this is an affirming place and I'm being accepted as being intersex here. And then boom, for some vague reason, it's not, or like there's some hang up over something that just, that must be, I don't know. I just feel like I get why there's skepticism and there's a lot of whiplash involved in that kind of a thing.
That's a really interesting point, because as much as I don't like those statements of faith and, this church believes this and this church believes that, in a more progressive environment, and especially one without like a national denomination. This was a very independent operation here. So there's no governing body. It's just a bunch of people trying to figure something out. And it can get confusing. You don't know from one day to the next what the rules are or what the expectations are or what how you're going to run afoul.
I do find it interesting how there is this sort of and I guess kind of going back a little bit. We in one of our earliest episodes of the podcast, we had a friend of mine on who went through a pretty harrowing experience with his boyfriend. That when they were kind of discovering, I guess. If I remember correctly, his boyfriend was beginning to kind of discover his own sexuality and come into his own, and the church, which happened to be a church that I worked for a number of years, and it wasn't in any way, shape, or form a progressive church. It was a very staunchly Reformed Calvinist mega church. In the vein of like the Acts 29 network and whatnot. Okay. But they had no policies in place for what they would do or how they would handle any sexual minority or gender non-conforming people if they were to ever attend the church. So the way that the entire situation went down was pretty horrific. That on one side where you have these conservative churches, but even progressive churches, like you were talking about, if there's no clarity of policy, if there isn't a sense that like given X, Y, and Z circumstance, we will do A, B, and C. For instance, there's this organization called Church Clarity, and they provide something of a database for churches, and they have very simple yes or no questions that they ask a church, and churches often don't respond to them, so they have a team of volunteers that digs through sermons and the website and doctrinal statements if they're all available, and then kind of cross-references and checks based on what we're hearing from these sermons or whatever, this church is unclear, non-affirming, etc. But they ask very specific questions of the churches who do respond, yes or no questions. So, for instance, will you hire an LGBTQ person to be on staff? Will you ordain LGBTQ people as clergy? Will you perform a same-sex wedding? Yes or no? It's all yes or no questions, and it has nothing to do with beliefs. It's all about actively enforced policies, because regardless of what I think a pastor may believe, if there are no policies on the books, then that ambiguity just leaves room for all sorts of abuses and look, the other thing too is, especially in these more progressive circles, those abuses are often unintended. They're just the natural consequences of not having policies that you can turn to and say, hey, in this circumstance, we're going to do X, Y, and Z because it's in writing.
Yes.
Rather than flying by the seat of your pants or trying to figure it out as you go. Because I think we're now at the point in society where we know what's around us. And churches are running to catch up, but they're doing a pretty piss poor job of it by and large. So Yeah. Anyway, that was my little rant about that circumstance, because it's awful what happened there.
It is, and I think too that's exactly what was happening. It was just a bunch of average people flying by the seat of their pants, trying to figure out a confusing situation, and I think that the pastor was very much trying to appease everyone, to appease Danny, to make Danny feel comfortable, but make everybody else feel comfortable too. And because it was sort of this open, like everyone's welcome, you would weirdly have conservative people and people who were not at all conservative in the same space trying to make sense of things. And there's no way at some point that you're going to please everybody. And if you don't have, hey, at the end of the day, this is going to be an affirming congregation, or we are going to support this person. And I think too, that as the support for Danny was causing friction, I think that then cooled some of the, motive to continue to support him, like actual donors were leaving the church over the situation. And then that became harder and harder, of course, then to, yes, we're going to continue to be supportive here.
That's fascinating. Like just the idea that, you could, when you're trying to make everyone feel comfortable, it's an impossible situation, because somebody is going to, if you're actually standing for anything. So it's, people who are LGBTQIA, anywhere in the queer spectrum, going to feel comfortable or welcome, or people that have problems with it are going to feel uncomfortable or comfortable with their stance. Like it's impossible to have two opposing, places and have both. Like, I mean, I've heard this kind of nonsense out there. I'm trying to think if it was, I don't even want to misquote who it was, but somebody who was in one of those white progressive males was saying something like, in my church, immigrants and ICE workers, are sitting in the pews with each other and both feel comfortable. And I'm like, no, that's actually not possible. You're really, you're imagining something, but have a pretty strong feeling that immigrants are not comfortable next to the ICE people. I'm like, it's not how any of that works. But I think people would like to imagine that they could, play every side of the fence and that works. But at the end of the day, somebody is going to be uncomfortable when you take
we want this utopia.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah. It sounds like a nice ideal.
Right. It's a great ideal, but you can't ever get there until the regressive element is cleaned up and educated and faces what they are doing and what they have done, and make reparations for it. I mean, I would love to live in a country where we could just, imagine that there's no skin color, and, the whole ideal of I don't see color. I would love to live in that country, but we can't get there because there are things that have happened in this country that no one has ever made reparations for, and no one has ever fessed up to. And the vestiges of those policies that were put in place centuries ago are still reverberating through our laws today. Those policies still exist in one way, shape, or form, and we're not doing anything about it. So we can't have that utopia. We can't have that world that people seem to want so much to just skip through the hard parts. I mean, look, even Germany, for example, they're still struggling. And they could probably be seen as an example, perhaps for many other countries around the world, of facing their crimes against humanity and, putting into place a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that then moves people forward and educates the population. But they're still struggling as well. So the fact that we in the U.S. haven't even taken a look at what we did. I mean, we can't even get to that point of what Germany looks like now.
Right, right.
So, again, sorry, I I went on another rant.
No, no, I get it. I was in Germany a few years ago and I saw that, I think these are nice ideas that we could all be unified and that we can all come from diverse walks of life and worship together in the same building and worship the same creator. And I too wish that were true. And I wish it worked out that way. And I wish that we could get there, but a lot of people want to skip over a lot of hardship and pain in the process.
And sometimes that hardship it's going to cost you, like your donors, right? Like if you have some, and I find a lot of places have some money behind them that are very white, conservative, rich boomer males, and they run the show. And in so many organizations and places, like you have a lot of young people that are being recruited to take on roles, and they do not know, and the organization itself that's trying to recruit them is not promoting or telling you exactly where the money's coming from and what the unofficial policies are, because they don't want to scare them away from wanting to be a part of it. But at the end of the day,
right.
Like you can't just take that money from people who are going to be phobic of others or hateful or racist or anything, and then just try and appease them at the same time. Like you have to make a decision on what do you actually stand for? And if you're trying to just make it work for everyone, then it's like in Danny's situation, it really backfired. How did that whole scenario, I know your book speaks about how it backfired on you, being an ally in terms of losing that job opportunity. Did it end up affecting you, or was it at the same time, or is it even in the book about, as well as how your community, how Danny's story intersected with your faith at that point in time in your church, watching how they handled things and how that played out for you as well? Is that in the book, or
I think it is. It is in the book. There, it's in 3 parts. Where first part is Danny's story, like as Nate was saying, just kind of him coming up to the, through his life up to the point where he decides I can't go on like this. And then we kind of get my story and how I grew up in these evangelical communities. And then I'm, a youth minister and all these things. And then we get to the intersection where basically Danny and I are now at this point together where our church isn't working for us anymore. Our friendship's still really strong. And Danny, at this point, because we cover a couple of years in time, Danny has, it ends with him, a little bit of a spoiler alert, it ends in a wedding. So we've got Danny and his wife and my husband and myself. We're very good friends, and we're kind of as a unit shoved out of our church, bit by bit. And then what next? Where do we go? What does life look like when you're not in this church community? I'm a big community person. I like to have my safe, secure community of people that I know I can count on. And then suddenly that's vaporizing. And I really had to rethink and rebuild. First of all, what do I believe? Because at the same time, the world was sort of politically and in every other way just sort of falling apart, where I'm seeing that all of the Christian leaders and Christian institutions that I had learned from growing up and people I had respected were doing things and saying things and supporting things that I could no longer get behind. And I just realized I had to scrap everything and start over, like scorched earth, and decide to kind of see what grows up again, comes up from the scorched earth, and realize that I don't know for sure. In fact, I don't know a lot of things. There's a lot I just don't know. And I had to get really comfortable with that and not abandon the thought of Christianity or abandon the thought of God, but kind of be open to what that looks like and how it might be a lot different than what I've been taught my whole life.
Yeah.
Yep.
I feel like a lot of people can relate to that.
Yeah.
Because we are sort of wired.
Those are my people now.
Yeah.
This is a community right now. A lot of podcasts are jumping in to try and help people to see you're not by yourself right now. Yes. There's so many of us that are saying, what was this bill of goods we grew up with? We're told that this was about this, that these were the values, that, these were the focus on the families and here are all the family values. And then you just see something completely, see the rise of Trump or the rise of just, the insurrection that happened, that they're doing the proceedings and, and the committee to, and you're just like, this is the world that we're in. What COVID did to churches, with churches ignoring it and politicizing it and not caring. Like, it really has been a period. I don't know. I feel like just so much has been happening in a very small period of time. So I was wondering, where did your story take place in the middle of Trump's election, COVID, all of that? Where does this happen with the school? Is it all before this all goes down, or is this during, or how did those interplay together?
They definitely interplayed. The action, if you will, started before 2016, but by the time 2016 hit, I was deeply embroiled in some of the consequences, because there were consequences of not taking the tenure track job and then trying to just continue on, cobbling things together as an adjunct, where some of the work started to dry up. And there's a point in my life where I still don't have my MFA. I no longer know how I'm going to completely pay for my MFA. And I am just trying to scrap together any sort of teaching gig I can just to make it through my program. And I'm tired and I'm cranky and starting to get depressed. And then this is the rise of Trump. Right about at this point, we get to enter the political scene. And I start seeing church leaders. I was really, disclaimer, I was late to the game to understand that Christians like Trump, because I was at this more progressive church that wasn't necessarily promoting him or talking a lot about that. But I don't know what I really thought. Did I think that the Christians were voting for Hillary? At the end of the day, probably not. But I didn't know that they loved Trump. So I was late to that. But I clearly remember one night seeing, I think it was October 2016, and seeing that there was going to be this, essentially a Trump rally, but I think it was Kirk Cameron was calling all of the Christians to come together to pray about the election. And I called my husband. I said, oh my goodness, Brad, come look at this. I think the Christians are into Trump, and I don't know. My world was rocked. And then from that point on, just seeing the Christian community completely buy this hook, line, and sinker, and seeing all of, like I was saying, the organizations, the people, the churches fall into this, and knowing I can't go there, I don't support this. And now I don't really have any, much in the way of respected church leaders or people I can look to, or all the people that I learned from in my life were now doing things that I found pretty reprehensible. And that all contributed to this, scorched earth, thing. I don't have my school. I don't have my church. I don't really know what's going on in the greater Christian community anymore. So I think it was all very much, it was all just coming to a head.
And you start to feel pretty isolated at that point, right? Like, I remember when all of that was going down, I was at a church that when it came to those kinds of things had a very don't ask, don't tell sort of attitude. But
that's sort of a common thread with evangelical churches on almost every topic that's controversial.
Yep.
And I remember distinctly feeling like, I'm looking around the room, and I'm in I had become much more vocally left wing at that point. And I remember looking around the room, and it dawned on me, like, there are probably quite a few people in this room who voted for Trump. And I don't know that I feel safe in this environment anymore. And that was one of the first moments where, I mean, there were a whole other there was a whole plethora of reasons why I had to walk away from that church. The least of which being the political climate, though that was kind of a motivator, and it popped into my mind and served as one of the impeti, I guess, for me.
Good word.
Walking away, but I do remember this sort of isolating feeling. Thanks. This isolating feeling of, and it was so stark. It suddenly hit me, and it was after the election, after the inauguration. It was a few months after the inauguration, and it hit me one Sunday, and I'm like, I looked around at people, and I'm like, oh no, I don't feel safe here.
Yeah,
it's interesting how like that situation was. I mean, there's been a few unveilings, COVID being, again, like we said, another one of them. But like, I feel like that was one of those that sort of pulled back the curtain for people who didn't realize, like you said, Cynthia, that for you that wasn't obvious to you, or it was a surprise seeing Kirk Hamlin. I think I felt similar as a Canadian. Because Canadian evangelicals, I mean, we watch the Kirk Cameron movies. We get all of the Americans run the show when it comes to white evangelicalism. Like Canadian evangelicalism is just importing it. It's just like, it's getting pumped into. And I grew up in white evangelicalism up in Canada. That's where I live. And I was completely stunned. Not that I was stunned for sure that Trump got elected, but I think I was more stunned when I saw the statistic that 81% of white evangelicals in the States voted for Trump. That was where I was like, no, my group, the ones that trained us, taught us, gave us all these tools and said, this is what we believe. And they're the main support group behind this clown. Like, I just did not, like, it was one of the, and I think it already started my own deconstruction process, probably right close to that, actually. And I wouldn't have called it that at that time, or wouldn't have put that label on it. But it was one of those things that was right in my face that I couldn't really avoid as I was questioning the things I was taught, to see where are the leaders of this movement? Who do they follow, and what do they actually believe? Not what they say they believe, but what are they willing to compromise? And to, like, they were always telling us not to compromise growing. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. Grow up in youth group. No, I was youth leader too, like you. You're talking about like the importance of staying true to your convictions and not compromising and giving up for Jesus and sacrificing. And then all of a sudden the curtain gets pulled back and you're like, oh, wow, like they're willing to throw everything away to have a leader who backs up some of what they think and who can give them political power. And it was just, and it doesn't matter how much compromise is going into it. It's fine. And it was just like, whoa, stunning.
Yeah. It was stunning. Yeah, because, personally, like you're saying, like I was starting to have all of these very concerning questions because, I'd spent like maybe 18 months at this point, going through everything went through with the university and with Danny and seeing things begin to unravel. And then to see this play out on the national stage, I cried. I cried the day after the election. I know I'm not alone in that. I know I was, very much not, it was not a unique story, but I was crying because to me, that was, it made everything real. It made everything like, I really am going through something that's I'm not going to be the same after wherever I land. It's not going to be the same place. And I knew it then.
Yeah.
I think too, possibly, and I'm thinking of the pain you were going through as you realized like this isn't gonna be the same anymore. But do you also find that there was a piece of you that as you were going through your church experience and the situation with Danny and the university, that there was a little piece of you before the Trump election that was like, well, one bad actor here, one bad college there, one, this is just not done properly here or there. But like, it's not the whole entire thing. It's not the whole system. It's just the bad actor here or there. Like, was this one of those moments where it was like, oh, now you have to piece together how these things interplay and what that looks like?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. Yeah, it was like, it went from being like personal crisis to, like I think I've run into, some bad circumstances to, I think the whole entire system is coming unglued. And I don't know what that is going to look like for any of us anymore.
And it's frightening in the beginning, but I want to ask, what has that been like for you? I mean, now we're six years removed from Trump's election. I mean, since he got kicked out of office, way less than that. But from that election day, a lot has gone on and changed. I'm sure in your life too. Yeah. What has it been like living more authentically, I guess, having to stand by what you believe, having to flesh those things out? What does this chapter look like in your life? If you're so we think of the wilderness and the whole like shock of everything kind of falling apart. Some people are in that spot maybe right now, and maybe just feeling. I was talking with Nate over my lunch break, and I was like, I feel like there was a big long wilderness period for me where I felt like a refugee. I felt like a fugitive. I didn't fit into any specific Christian culture stuff that I grew up with. It just none of it seemed to fit. How are you finding it? What does that space look like for you now as opposed to, back then? How does that feel for you?
Wow, like? It feels freeing. I remember early on my therapist telling me, well, it's kind of like scorched earth, but from scorched earth, you start to see shoots of life pop up. And I was waiting for a while to start to see shoots coming up. And then I did. And the really amazing thing to me is I look at my life now and I have more friends than I ever did. And the relationships are more genuine, because I think what I was able to, what I've come to the conclusion of is a lot of the relationships that are based in church communities, you hear about, they're our church family. And these are our people that we do life together in these church communities. And that sounds great. But if one person, there's a week you go back to church and this family's gone and you never see them again. And they're out of the family. They crossed the line. Some unforgivable sin has taken place. And I would see people just disappear. And so that seemed very conditional to me, very conditional. And now I can approach my friendships from this place of, I don't have to wonder, how are they going to react if they know I believe this or think this or have questions around that. It's not like we're going to kick you out of the community thing. It's, okay. Yeah, I have questions around those things too. Let's, we can talk about it. So it's very authentic in that I don't have to present, here I am completely in line with your doctrinal statement or your whatever statement that you've put out, that governs this church family, right? I can just meet people and talk about, well, I have a lot of questions around these things. I feel really strongly about these other things. I'm not so sure about this. I've got a lot of questions. And that seems to foster just more authenticity from other people, because then they're able to feel safe saying, I don't know how I feel about this, or I don't know what I think about that. And then you start to realize that there are people all around you that love and support you, no matter what your actual official position on a bunch of random things is. And that is very, very freeing.
It's amazing. And you mentioned unconditional love. I think, when you talked about how we're family and then you see people disappearing and you're like, wait, this is what we're told. This is our spiritual family. It's not actually upholding to what we're being told about it. And then you get into unconditional love, which is something the church is very big on talking about, but that it's just so unreal. Like you get out of the system and it's like, wait, I'm actually discovering, I know for myself, unconditional love for the first time. What is it like to love a friend without worrying that, I don't know if you remember the term from inside evangelicalism, because you hail from it too, but friendship evangelism. I don't know if you ever heard that terminology, but it's just so telling, and it's like just it sort of states straight up front, we have an agenda on being your friend, Yep. And it's interesting because so much stuff ends up very projection-y. Like, you hear about the liberal agenda, the woke agenda, the gay agenda. Everyone supposedly has an agenda. And you're like, well, what are they talking about? I don't know any gay people sitting around trying to plot to make people gay. They're just trying to figure out how to keep people safe. And like, there's all these projections about an agenda. And I was thinking about it and I was like, wait a second. We had the agenda as evangelicals. We were the ones who had to be friends in order to win people to Jesus. And I just find it beautiful to know what real unconditional love is, where I don't feel that pressure in any friendships that I have to be a good friend in order to shine the light of Jesus so that someone's going to come to know the eternal love of God. Like that my friendship is all about saving them out of hell. And I've heard people say, yeah, but you don't need to make that the main thing. If it's true, you need to make it the main, of course, if this is heaven or hell is the backdrop, then how do you ignore something like that without living in constant cognitive dissonance, without constantly having to shut off and close off pieces of who you are? So just that whole concept of unconditional love, as much as I thought I had the source of that, I had never actually experienced that until coming out, what you talked about, that freedom that was popping in my head was those rich relationships where you can just literally love without that agenda anymore, without having to agree to any statement.
I know. And I know exactly what you're talking about, because I was always told that your real friends are your friends from church. Those are the people you get real with and do life with. And the people outside of church, the heathen, unsaved people, they were your mission field, and you only hung out with them, like Gail's saying, within the context of, I'm trying to win them over. And that it's terrible. It's awful, because you're really it's not a real friendship, right? It's
right.
Neither
it's a
of those are real
ruse,
friendships.
and you're telling yourself it's sincere.
Because you're sincerely worried that they're going to go to hell and it's going to be your fault.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
That's the part you don't tell yourself is the actual base of your relationship, but it's hard to form an authentic relationship off of fear.
Yeah.
And trying to save someone. Yeah.
Wow. Cynthia, I feel like we could go on forever.
I know. This is great.
We have another.
You're my people.
we have another friend who likes to refer to like-minded people as kindred spirits, and I feel like this was something of that, a meeting of the minds. Despite the fact that you use an iPhone, I think we can forgive that, and we are kindred spirits. And I'm grateful for this conversation. This was refreshing, and it was great to hear from you and to hear you share your experience with Danny's story. The book is called Intersexion, but it's not spelled the usual way. So we'll put all of that info in fact, I'll just make the title of this episode Intersexion, so that people can see how it's spelled. They can go look for the book, but I'll put the link to the book in the show notes so people can go ahead and buy it. It is out now on all of the retailers, though I would recommend using bookshop.org or IndieBound to purchase it. So we'll go ahead and throw links into the show notes.
I have, Nate, one last question for Cynthia before we wrap up.
Okay.
And it actually has to do with her book, because you threw out the link. What are the things that you hope your book clearly communicates to the people that are reading it? What do you want? What do you hope people can walk away with?
I like to think that this book is for anyone who is curious about living an authentic life, to be true to their truest selves, and to learn how to approach others from this place of authenticity and build a community around authentic relationships. I think above and beyond all else, I think that is what I hope people walk away with.
That's awesome.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Cynthia. Once again, the book is called Intersexion, and you can purchase it through the links in the show notes. And Cynthia, where can people find you online on the interweb socials? Are there any links that you want to share with us?
Yes. So I have a website at cynthiavaccadavis.com, and the cool thing is I've got somebody. I'm not as tech savvy as I want to be. I tried making my website, and that's what's but I've got a guy on it now, and he's got all my links to all my socials. So if you just go to my website, you can just link to all of my socials from there.
Awesome. So we'll also put that link in the show notes as well. For those of you who do check the show notes, please do that, because then you can find Cynthia that way. Thank you again, Cynthia, for joining us. This has been a blast, and I do hope people will go ahead and check out the book one last time. The book is called Intersexion by Cynthia Vacca Davis, and I guess we'll see you around soon. That wraps up another episode of the Full Mutuality Podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. And if you don't already have one, head over to our website, fullmutuality.com, for a list of all the apps you can find us on.
We couldn't do this without you, our listeners, so thank you so much for your continued support. Speaking of support, one of the best things you can do for us is to head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a review.
I'm pretty sure 5-star reviews get you an extra crown in heaven.
Look, seriously, if you found this episode insightful, spread the word and share it with your friends.
And don't forget to follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Full Mutuality. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Full Mutuality Podcast.